Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Everything Practice Management. This particular webinar has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. So what you would have to do is log into your respective Law Society portals, state the title Everything Practice Management, and redeem or gain your 1 hour of CPD credits, or log in that 1 hour of credits. Okay, so I repeat that today's session carries 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. And as always, welcome you to this afternoon. Grab your coffee or tea. And it is going to be predominantly a monologue where you have to bear with me as I share with you what we've learned, and hopefully we'd love for you to use the chat window to share back about topics we're talking, specific questions that you may have that we would try and answer during the session. This particular session is being recorded and will be available for you to consume on our YouTube channel. I would appreciate if you could let me know if you can actually hear me, because I can certainly hear myself. I pretty much mimic myself on an app. The support staff, hopefully you can hear me okay. If you are having any issues, I would highly recommend that you use the phone number provided to dial in. Okay, and I've provided that right at the top. Thank you very much, everyone. Greatly appreciate it. So there's a phone number you can dial into if you're using your computer audio. Sometimes that's kind of messed up. So please do use the phone numbers provided. Awesome, so let's get started. Now, as part of this webinar and part of this topic, and we have delivered these webinars and this topic several times over the past year, we were requested to conduct another CPD session this month, earlier in the month, as some of our friends in the industry need to get their CPD credits in line, and we always oblige to what our customers want. As part of that, we've, talking about the Everything Practice Management seemed like a good start. Hopefully you've completed your year-end, you've submitted your reports, and we're starting this 1st of April, essentially to reiterate, again, for many of you who are seasoned legal practitioners, as I commonly say, I am kind of preaching to the choir. I am repeating this as a way for us to remember the basics, for us to reconcile with what needs to get done in the coming year to be successful and profitable. And hence this yet another webinar of Everything Practice Management hopefully drives home the message of things that you have to do, things that you're doing right today, things that you can improve upon moving forward. Okay? And hopefully kind of showcase to you how legal accounting, practice management, and several tools that you have in your arsenal as a business owner as well as a legal practitioner can really help augment that overall experience. We've looked at the Law Society's guidelines. We started off with Ontario for LSUC and now LSO. And since then, over the past 13 years, as we serve the legal community here at uLaw, we've now had the pleasure and opportunity to review the professional guidelines provided by other provinces in the country as well, as we do serve the needs of legal practitioners across the country. And we find a common element, a very subliminal common element across these important buckets or obligations, that most of what's expected from these law societies fall under. That's a huge, long English statement. But essentially what we've seen is whether you're a practitioner in Ontario, a practitioner in Alberta, there are certain jurisdictional differences and expectations. There could be certain add additional documents. There could be some extra work that's needed. Maybe the templatization slightly varies. The taxes, of course, are different. But in essence, in terms of your obligation to the profession, they remain to be the same. Okay? So if you really look at the client intake, service, and communication, we've kind of broken it down to the top 7, starting with client intake, service, and correspondence or communication, to file management, financial management, business, professional time, and of course, personal management. As you can appreciate, that remains to be the same across the country. And we'll look at each and every obligation in deeper detail. I'm just going to help a friend here. Kindly dial in too. And enter the participant code. Perfect. Thank you very much. So as part of the overall client intake, service, and communication, further, we've broken it down into some of the key highlights that you should remind yourself. If you are a legal practitioner who's just starting your practice, maybe this is a good reminder of things that you would have to keep in mind as you start your practice and conduct your business. And for other seasoned campaigners, again, as I mentioned before, retaining this information. So client intake, service, and communication. What are you expected? What documents that the Law Society want? And what's really expected through this little pathway across the overall journey? What the Law Society wants for you to do to begin with as you correspond with prospective clients, existing clients, is find a process or a process, whether that's tool-based or manual, whether it's using help or if you're doing this yourself, to record in detail all of the calls and consultations that you have with these prospective clients. Okay? And I've shared this before, using the technology, legal practitioners and how they correspond with prospective clients have evolved, has changed over time. Even when we first started our business, we had our clients utilizing PDF documents as the most modern way in which they could intake information, as most of them would do that over a form in person in the office. Yeah. So since then till now, through the evolution of technology, you as a legal practice have also evolved how you intake information from your clients. We have clients today having websites with KYC. We have customers who have apps even that makes it easier for prospective clients to correspond with them. You may have WhatsApp as a business and pretty much promote that phone number across Facebook, Twitter, whatever your social media outreach campaigns can be. So there's different ways in which legal practitioners are starting to gather information from prospective clients. Now, irrespective of the channel through which you get the information, you're capturing critical information that's important not just for your own business, but also important from a compliance standpoint. So detailed recording of calls and consultations, recording the name, correspondence address if there is one at that time, some way of communicating with your client through phone or email, right? You capture all of that. And the next immediate step that you take prior to moving forward with creating a file or matter is determining if there is any conflict in representing this potential prospective client. So conflict check for confidentiality, a critical next step as soon as you've done that initial intake. Now, once you've determined the confidentiality and you've done the conflict check, depending on the pathway you take, you may either say thank you but no thank you to the client because there is a conflict and you want to be prudent that there is a confidentiality component to this, and hence, there is a conflict in representing you. You may refer them to another friend or another legal practice. You may not refer them. Or in most cases, if there isn't a conflict, you move on to the next stage, which is creating a file or a matter, as we call it, for that particular client, for that particular scope of matter. You may have several scopes, several statement of work, several files for the same client, but it's very critical that you are able to categorically bucket these files based on the nature and scope of work. And under that matter, the next immediate step is to ensure that you have a formal document through which you can again formalize this business relationship. Typically, they're either called a retainer agreement or an engagement agreement. If there is a retainer amount involved, again, following the name, it's called a retainer. If there is no retainer, it could be an engagement document. Okay? And in that retainer or engagement document, you are outlining your responsibilities as a legal practitioner, the nature and scope of work for which you're going to work for the client, the expectation and the responsibilities of the client, and most importantly, the fee structure and pretty much determining the collateral for fees, the retainer top-up, how are you managing with disbursements, how often do you need that retainer to be topped up, what happens if that retainer is not topped up in time, right? How much is your overall fees in terms of legal billing time? And if this is not a time and material matter, if it's a flat rate or a fixed rate matter, then what does that cost look like? So all of that goes into your fee structure so that it's clear, so that your customer and your prospective customers don't come back to you to negotiate or for a lack of clarity. If there's a retainer situation, then there are certain important steps that you need to take. One is you need to accept that retainer, provide your client with a retainer receipt that, of course, most importantly, ensures that you've covered your end in terms of establishing that a retainer has been agreed upon, that the amount has been paid for, and you're confirming the acceptance of that retainer. You then deposit that retainer depending on how you received the funds in. Today, you could get retainer up to $7,500 in cash, right? So you may take a cash retainer for $1,000 from the customer, in which case your responsibility as a business owner or as a legal practitioner is to take that money and within 24 hours deposit that into your trust account. So when you first start a business, and this is for anyone who's just started, you pretty much open a trust account and a operating account, or a general account as it's called, with your financial institution that you're working with, right? Could be CIBC, TD, could be credit union banks today, which is getting a lot of familiarity in Canada. And there are certain rules around trust account, and hence you need to oblige to those rules that govern how you appropriate trust funds. So receive that retainer within 24 hours, deposit the cash retainer. If it's not cash, if it's a check or a direct deposit, then of course its money is in the trust account. And you provided your client with a retainer receipt, and that's pretty much end of phase one, which is thank you very much for reaching out. No conflict. We started a file. We're accepting a retainer. We've deposited the retainer, given you a receipt. Everyone's happy. Now you're all set to get started with working on that file. So that first leg of responsibilities are complete. Now, if for whatever reason, as I mentioned before, either during execution of that matter or in the process of getting to that client file, or due to a conflict, you may not engage with the customer or this prospective client, saying, thank you so much for reaching out. Unfortunately, we can't work. Hence, an obligation for a logical closure to that business relationship and conversation is a non-engagement letter. So when you're drafting or potentially now looking at documents to templatize, then these are some of the documents that you want to keep in mind. Of course, if you're using legal accounting systems, practice management systems to help you with this, many of them today either help you to create your own templates or provide you with a head start for providing you with best practice templatizations that you can then tweak and repurpose. Okay? So non-engagement letter should certainly be one of those templatized documents that you have as part of your document arsenal. A simple reason, a fast, easy way for you to say, this is the reason why I'm non-engaging pertaining to this work that we discussed, and you as a legal practice or a legal business rather are no longer responsible for this work being taken care of. Get it signed and file it, which means you take a copy of that letter that the customer signs back and sends back to you, and you close that matter. Okay? So you're not focused on it anymore. Today's session is accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. Since the retainer letter is probably one of the most important step 1 templatized documents, quickly want to highlight and reiterate some of the important topics that you may want to cover within that retainer letter. So we have a lot of templates depending on the nature and scope of work sometimes, but in general, you want to cover right from nature and scope of work. Is this a small claims matter? Is this a family matter? LATB? Criminal? Could be many different things. Client responsibilities. We mentioned that, or I shared that before. How often do I top up the retainer? That's a client responsibility. Communicate back within a certain time. Let's say you need some information from the client. What happens if they don't respond back over 48 hours, right? Scheduling and course of representation as we move back into kind of the new norm, and as courts are opening up, what is your expectation for a customer or a client to show up at court? How often do you schedule course of representations? How often do you communicate with this client, and what is the frequency with which you expect correspondence back? And we spoke about the fee structure, starting with the retainer arrangements, and is there a termination clause? Very critical. I will underline the fact that every retainer agreement should have a very strong termination clause associated with it. If it's an engagement letter, then an engagement, I would say a non-engagement clause associated with that as well, or termination clause. Okay. And I shared this before, one of the more common modern retainer agreements that we're starting to see has this column, or I would say subject matter, around risks associated with modern ways of communication. I've done this webinar, as I said, several years. We started off with email, but I'm really seeing a lot of different channels through which legal practices communicate with clients, right? So it's very critical that you have that paragraph or that particular section within your retainer agreement, depending on your strategy for correspondence around risks associated with those channels and methods of communication. Okay? Perfect. So that's obligation 1. Intaking the client, due diligence, create the file, accept the retainer, and we move on to the next step. And this comes into, let's say we've agreed upon this work with this client. What are some of the obligations that are needed in terms of file management? So in a typical audit, and I'll take a step back, in a typical audit, auditors may sometimes ask you for a template of your retainer agreement, just to ensure that there's a bit of completedness in the retainer and the information that you're capturing, the clarity. Sometimes it's just a lot of jargons and it's not straightforward. So They want to review and share with you some feedback on how best you can tweak that retainer agreement. But if it pretty much covers a good percentage of everything we've just discussed, then you're definitely in good shape. So the next obligation is around file management. And believe it or not, sometimes auditors also ask for important compliance documents that pertain to file management as well. So some of the top things that you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with file management: as soon as you've created that matter or file, I'm going to call file and matter in the same sentence, first and foremost, you want to ensure that every file has a unique name or a unique code or an ID associated with that file. So it's easier for you to retrieve, faster for you to do your conflict checks. It's cross-indexed so that the next Jane Smith enters your business, you already have a strategy and a plan to do the conflict check fast so that, again, you can correspond and go back to your new prospective client faster. Right? That's really the name of the game. The speed, the efficiency is really the name of today's modern game. So ensuring that there are separate file numbers or unique identification for each matter, even if it's for the same client. Ensuring that under that file management, you certainly have the ability to store the conflict check that you did that is pretty much proof for why you determined to move ahead with this file in the first place. Okay. Now the file and what you capture under this file outside of the docketing and the dispersing and the invoicing would also pretty much have the ability for you to record client interactions. So whether it's text, email, the ability for you to store that information under that file. You may have third-party systems and connect each matter with those third-party systems too. Like you may have documents in a Drive or Dropbox because they're purpose-built to securely manage documents. But then it's easier for you to now connect those with matter management systems. With a click of a button, you pretty much know where to go to capture the files, the matters, and the information related to that file. And last but not the least, as I mentioned, ensuring that there's a proper cross-indexing of the files. And modern systems do this automatically, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you are using Excel sheets, if you're using Word documents to do this manually, please do ensure that it's easy and it's cross-indexed, because you may come across, a specific name like Jane, as I mentioned, across matters, right? Jane Smith may have been a witness in a matter. You may have not even created a file for a Jane Smith, but that information needs to be captured and cross-indexed so that when you do meet that Jane Smith, your system of record, for lack of a better term, should highlight that you met with the Jane Smith in a different matter. Okay? We move on to the third obligation, and we're about 25 minutes in. So please to ask any questions that you may have pertaining to the CPD. You could use the chat window. It is accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. So we've looked at client intake, service, and communication. We've looked at file management. We're now moving into the financial management, which is the next phase as you go further into working that file. Okay. Now the financial management, and again in this context, I'm specifically talking about managing finances related to a matter. And what are the finances? How do they apply to a matter? It applies starting with that retainer. It applies starting with the agreed upon billable time and material cost. It relates to the agreed upon flat rate or fixed rate delivery of service, all within that wonderful document called retainer. So the finances ideally follow the retainer agreement. That's the agreed upon and mutually signed upon agreement. So the deposited $1,000, for example, first needs to show up under this matter. It's not specific to a client, it's specific to this matter. Next, we have a look at how are you docketing for this particular matter. So if it's T&M, of course, and let's say your per hour rate is $200 or $400, then you're saying, here's the work that I've put in. I'm going to be charging an hour for this work. Initial client meeting could be court visit, could be document management, document generation, whatever tasks that you do for that particular file, you're going to docket that. You're going to put a T&M against it. And if there's a retainer involved, then now you're generating an invoice. And as soon as you generate that invoice, you're going to send it to the client and then do your trust transfer from the trust account into the general account. All of this comes under the financial management within that matter. If there's no trust involved, of course, you would then docket the effort, generate the invoice, and wait for payment. And as soon as that payment is received, you would deposit that into your operating account and also reflect it in this matter as part of the financial management. This is where you're also managing the disbursements, if any, involved. Because disbursements are critical. We've delivered various CPD sessions and webinars on disbursements and why they are very critical to your not only your business, but also to the compliance aspect of running your legal practice. So under financial management, you're also going to have to keep in mind, and as agreed upon in the retainer document, how are you planning to manage your disbursements? Are you planning to disperse through retainer? Are you drawing out of the retainer amount you received? And in that, are you planning to pay for disbursements from your trust account directly? Or are you still going to pay it out of your own pocket, do the trust transfers reflected on an invoice? Right? So all of this comes under financial management. And like how you have a retainer agreement to start the conversation with the client, we have an important document here called the invoice, which auditors sometimes want to explore and understand that it's, again, clear, precise, and can pretty much tell the whole truth of what's worked and what's not worked. So a running bill, for example, would be a great example of a very well-documented invoice. So at any time, your customer should be able to review that invoice saying, okay, I deposited $1,000, right? So far, they've billed me for $600, so there's $400 remaining in trust account. So that's the trust balance that the customer right away knows. All of that is driven from the financial management under that matter. Another important point for you to keep in mind, and it's not so much compliance, is if there are offenders within your clients who systematically take longer than anticipated time to make payments. Sometimes if you're doing this manually, you may realize this at a later time. But if you're using system of records, digital system of records, legal accounting systems especially, you have an opportunity to drive analytics that pretty much can tell you who within your customer base takes the longest time to make a payment. You may even be able to drive information in terms of if there's any commonality with areas of practices that can also lead to you making good financial, smart business decisions as well. For example, if you're seeing a trend for whatever reason that your criminal matter is a bad example. So maybe small claims matter or certain specific areas of practices, customers tend to pay you maybe after 31 days rather than 30 days, within 30 days. That's a trend that you can track. You can also track the reverse. If there's a retainer involved, how does that affect profitability for your business? The hope is it's higher. If you're dealing with disbursements paying out of trust account, how does that affect profitability? The hope is that it's higher. So on and so forth, right? Because sometimes if you're drawing disbursements out of general and you forget to include it in an invoice, that can sometimes lead to the bottom line. It's reduction of that. Okay, so you've done all of these management of finances related to matters, and you start out with an important document such as the invoice that reflects this back to the client. There's always a compliance document associated with each of these professional obligations, and this particular financial management section is what most of the newcomers dread about, for lack of a better term. So we talk about what are those compliance documents that most of the auditors are looking for from this particular obligation, and I would say again, pathway of your journey to complete that matter. These documents, as I always share, tell a story. The story about how those financial line items entered this file and left this file. So you have your ledgers, both trust and general, if both are involved. You have your journals, both trust and general. You have what's called a very important document called as a reconciliation statement, which is typically generated on a periodic basis at a minimum once a month. Ledgers, journals, reconciliation document, kind of the top 5 documents. And in addition to that, you may have jurisdictional documents such as Form 9A, especially if you're doing trust transfers from trust to general. So the Form 9A is just a specific Ontario-based document which highlights all of the trust transfers from trust to general electronically done. You may have the auditor may just ask you for an expense book, which is a very interesting document because the expense book pretty much includes expenses that you have incurred on behalf of the client, as well as expenses incurred on behalf of your business. So your laptop purchase, as well as your court application or whatever fees, both show up in that same document with jurisdictional taxes involved. Okay, not to confuse you too much, but at least at a high level, you have ledgers, journals, and a reconciliation statement to deal with as expected outcome documents, compliance documents from the financial management aspect of running your business. Again, reminding you that that is the expected professional obligation. So we've looked at client intake, service, and communication, looked at file management, and now the financial management. Next comes the business management aspect of the professional obligation. Right? And you might think, well, if this is me managing my own business, why is it an obligation to the profession? Well, a big obligation to the profession is that you stay in business and be in the profession, and keeping that as the kind of mandate, or keeping that as kind of a expected opportunity for you, doing the right things to stay profitable, stay afloat, and stay in business doing this in a prudent, transparent, professional way is critical and is an obligation that's expected. So one of the first things, of course, is as soon as you start your business, and 90% of you may agree, you're going to deal with expenses. Before you see that first revenue, most of the businesses are seeing expenses, especially if you're legal practice, you're seeing your law society fees, your initial, whether it's capital or operational expenses around office setup, all of the supporting technologies that come along with it, maybe a legal accounting system, practice management system, CRM, your phone, the plan for your phone, a computer or a laptop, maybe an iPad, Android. So there's quite a few expenses that you need to account for. You may have errors and omission fees that you're paying, right? So there's quite a few expenses. Business management starts off with you having a process, again, or a discipline or a strategy at the least of how you plan to manage these office expenses. Again, if you're incorporated as a business, then of course then you have to deal with your provincial taxes, your HST, GST, PST. If you're collecting it from your client, if you're paying for it through your expenses, then this minus that gives you a nice wholesome number for how much you either owe the government back or how much the government owes you. So filing those taxes is important. If you're not dealing with it, then that's fine. From an expense management, it's important for you to keep in mind the disbursements that come along that we discussed as part of the financial management of your matters, because that applies till you recover that back from your client. It's kind of tagged as a recoverable revenue, right? So it's part of the invoice, it's an expense that you've incurred, and if for whatever reason you're unable to recover it from the client, guess what? It becomes now part of your expense. So that particular application fee that was supposed to be paid by your client, for whatever reason, if not generated or raised within the boundary of your retainer agreement, sometimes we've seen this in real life, is an expense that unfortunately the legal firm then carries. The second important aspect, so one is expenses. So looking at all of the expenses that come with this of running your business. The second thing that you should start to consider, and it's an important obligation, is securing the data that's related to running your business. Keep in mind that you're not only dealing with your own information, so your business information, your address, your phone number, your logo, all of that. You're also now dealing with third-party or client information, which you need to safeguard and store in a very secure way. That doesn't mean that you have, a machine that's locked up in a room. It really means that you're a little bit more catered about understanding the different providers, their policies, and their security statements, their terms of use. You would see most of the cloud providers today have a privacy statement. Maybe some of them even have a very specific data security component to how do they manage their data, where is the data residing. For example, with uLaw, our data resides in Canada across servers in Ottawa and Montreal, and we only serve the needs of Canadian practitioners. So if you are working with uLaw today, you probably should, if you haven't already, should email us wanting to learn more about our security policies. Okay? Every company that offers services similar to ours do have them on their website, including ourselves. So you should definitely give that a read. In fact, a lot of us use a lot of cloud software today. We don't necessarily ask the question because we are dealing with big companies, and there's always a perceived notion of a bit of comfort in knowing that we're working with these large companies. And heck, if there is a problem beyond a point, we kind of concede to the fact that there isn't much we can do. And these companies pretty much have a disclaimer that says if anything were to happen because of this, then we're not liable anyways. So it's kind of a catch-22, if you will. But of course, you have to make the best decision that's most meaningful to your business. There's a certain give and take policy here. Convenience, cost effectiveness, or maybe a sense of perceived loss of control over security. If you're using mobile devices, we don't challenge Apple or Android or Samsung or other people who make the phone, because it's highly possible that data is being stolen. If there's hacked into, you download an app and it's not well tested, then that's a possibility, right? What if your machine or your phone is stolen? But sometimes having data in the cloud can be very effective because then you don't have direct physical responsibility to hold this data. And a lot of the cloud providers, including ourselves, we help back up the data. So if you have to always go back, even if you lose the data, you can always roll back to the most recent date. Okay, so as part of the business management, you're looking at expenses. You're looking at how you best set up your office. If you're an existing business, you're looking at expenses around better marketing, and you use data to help you make those decisions around better marketing expenses. Do I put it on Facebook? Do I put it on a big advertisement billboard on the streets of Mississauga or in Ottawa, right? Given the fact that a lot of systems today come up with their own apps, is it best to upgrade my phone today? So those are types of questions you may want to ask yourself. And how best do I have a process to manage them? Second, security, very critical based on the tools you use, being aware of the risks, rewards, corresponding that back to your client. Okay, did speak quite a bit on that. Did not expect to. All right, so we're about 40 minutes in. I hope you're all enjoying your cup of coffee or tea. I'm going to take a quick, recap. So we've looked at today's session being, again, a 1-hour professionalism CPD credits for those friends who did join us a little late. That's totally cool. We looked at the 7 major buckets of professional obligations that you have as a legal practitioner, whether you're in Alberta, Ontario, BC. We started off with looking at client intake, service, and communication. We looked at file management, financial management, which is all around the matter. We've just moved sideways to business management, which includes office-related expenses and understanding security concerns over all the tools that you use to manage those office expenses and your office. Now we're moving into the last 3 around professional time and personal management. Okay. So just like how you had a certain series of compliance documents around financial, file, and client intake, around business management, as I mentioned before, you do have certain compliance documents. The expense book, for a matter, very important that you generate that on a monthly basis. That captures expenses that you've incurred as an office and the disbursements. It could be a very simple example from a CRA standpoint, could be your HST document. For your own business management compliance standpoint, it could be the P&L on a monthly basis. So managing office expenses is very critical to both Law Society-related compliance, CRA-related compliance, as well as your own business management compliance. Then we look at professional obligations around professional management. So you as a legal practitioner, and we've kind of clubbed it around these 4 major topics. And as we tried to evolve this presentation and we looked at anything new that's been added, invariably fell under these 4 common buckets. One is pretty much staying on top of the new legislations and new case laws. You have a lot of third-party systems that give you information that you can refer. There are books that you often have to go through, training that you may have to go through, CPD sessions such as today that you may have to go through for all of that. Reviewing your professional conduct guidelines. This is something we see not all legal firms do, something that we highly recommend because it's definitely an important obligation as part of the professional management. You can, if you don't have these guidelines, you can review them under your Law Society portals, which I believe they're available there, or you can download them from our friendly Google, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. Okay? Now, membership of professional associations, that's of course taken a bit of a hit in the last couple of years due to COVID. We haven't had the opportunity to meet people in person as much as we would like to, but that's slowly and hopefully changing in many provinces slowly. But the criticality of what the Law Society highlights is knowing that this is a high intensity, high traffic, high transactions, high expectation work life, that you find comfort in individuals who are pretty much on the same boat as you are, so that you can share success, failures, frustrations, sometimes even help your own cause through unity, but through strength in numbers. Sometimes that can even help you as a profession as well. And hence, it's not a mandatory requirement, but I believe it's recommended, and it helps towards the sanity of you running your business in some ways. Okay, as I said, it's the sisterhood and the brotherhood of being in a group with similar pain points, similar success criteria. And last but not the least, which I'm sure all of you who joined us today have a clear idea of, is the completion of both substantial and professional continued professional development hours, CPD. I believe it's 3 professional hours in a year. It's maybe 3.5 or 4, so I'd love to hear from you around the substantial. And we're starting to think of getting some of the substantial sessions going at uLaw, so we are going to be submitting a few of the topics for substantial in this year, and we hope to get a positive, favorable response back from the Law Society. And if that is the case, then we'll have the pleasure of conducting substantial CPDs as well. But as of today, we've only been approved for these many topics of professionalism CPD credits. But hence, it's important that you are constantly looking for opportunities to gain knowledge, not just from a mathematical component, right? I need 3 hours, so here's 3 hours. Many of these CPD sessions are very meaningful, highly knowledgeable. You meet a lot of people with common interests. You can ask questions. It's just pretty cool. And hence, it's a great learning experience. Again, I'm hoping that this is one such learning experience for you. And hence, yeah, those are the top professional management components of your obligation. There's 2 more left, another 10 minutes remaining. I think I'm really doing well this afternoon. It has to be the mint tea. Time management. I've always been shy about speaking about time management. I've been in this business now for about 14 years. Of course, I run my own life. I have a family. Time management is critical to all of us. Time is money, but time is life too. Specifically, what we often highlight around time management are 2 aspects. One, as a legal practitioner, you have the time related to your work. And depending on the nature, scope of work that you as a legal firm deal with, depending upon how many of you are in your firm, depending on the type of work that you take, this particular quotient may vary, and it should vary. But we started off delivering these types of webinars, keeping in mind the solo practitioners, the individuals who are running businesses, the individuals who have to do 12 different things and wear 8 different hats at all times. Okay, so we'll start there, and of course, that will change depending on the size and nature of the legal firm. But we'll keep that solo practitioner's perspective in mind. We all work towards a common goal, but we've seen that in the legal business, especially for a sole practitioner, you're now dealing with sometimes 10, 15 different files at the same time. And you need headspace to think about how best you're going to approach the success criteria of that matter. On top of that, you need headspace to think about, or Mindspace, however you want to call it, around how to stay afloat in this very, very competitive business. At the same time, you need Mindspace around how do I ensure that I'm staying compliant, because that compliance audit is going to knock my door at some time. So there's three major aspects when it comes to the work time. And in addition to all of this, you need the second aspect to time management is around how best you manage your time to have enough left, hopefully, to run a life, run your family, be happy about who you are and what you do as a daredevil, as I often call, running your legal business. So it's pretty much time crunched, and I'm sure you would agree. Keeping in mind that the nature of business that you're in to begin with puts you a step back with regards to time, you need to really maximize what you have as time. And how best can you do that is letting as much as possible some of the mundane, repetitive tasks that have very set outcomes be automated through proven technologies or processes, or earn enough so that you can get help for that solo practitioner, maybe an assistant, maybe a bookkeeper, an accountant, who can really help with certain aspects and take that away from your own mind space. Okay, maybe take away the compliance aspect by investing in a good legal accounting system. Maybe take away that mind space around how do I grow my business by hiring a marketing company that can help grow the footprint of your social media presence, etc. Right? An accountant who can help you with the mind space around accounting needs, so on and so forth. And if you're really growing as a business, maybe now you outsource, maybe you now hire. That's how all firms grow. But I'll draw your attention to three critical aspects that we think a legal practitioner should be looking at from a work time management perspective. And these three aspects we find are very unique to the legal business. The first is looking at what's called as a pro bono hour. I'm sure everyone's heard of it. I actually didn't hear about it till I got into this legal business. And this is a very common term, as you probably know, in the legal business. These are hours provided by you as a legal firm where you could have charged for it, but you're not charging for it. Pro bono, that's the word. And hence it's important for you, hopefully as part of time management, to keep a tab. First and foremost, if you are providing pro bono, how much is that pro bono? Who are the clients who have enjoyed the pro bono? Again, these pro bono hours could be strategic. It could be part of your marketing. It could be part of who you do and the kind of nature and scope of work. Nevertheless, important for you to review it at least on a weekly basis, if not daily. We think that can really elevate your appreciation for your time when you first start looking at the non-billable or pro bono time dockets that you invest in your client. The second, as a non-billable time, would be the time that you put towards activities that are non-billable. How much of time are you spending in generating your reconciliation statement? Is it 3 hours? If it is, hey, that's non-billable time just right there. It's part of your compliance, it's part of managing your business, but it's non-billable. So looking at how much you spend today, reviewing that so that you can appreciate how can you help reduce that time. Instead of me spending 3 hours, can I only spend an hour? That gives me back 2 hours of time that I can put towards productive work. So non-billability both from a pro bono standpoint as well as non-billability from a standpoint of work that's taking you away from revenue generating activities and how you can reduce it. The second Again, it seems like a very small issue. It's like really not a big deal, but focusing your effort towards managing active files. So a very small, simple way for you to categorize or classify your matters so that your focus is always on the current ones that need to be closed. The ones that are closed are done with unless you need them for conflict checks. Your eyes, your focus should pretty much not be on it. So easily classifying matters, files, sometimes even clients, as ghost clients, for example. Your focus should not be on the ghost client. If they came and flirted with the idea of engaging you and then disappeared as a ghost, categorize them, move on to the active clients that are giving you the business. And the third and the more cliched aspect of time management is managing a task list or to-do list. And the reason we brought it up is because, again, just like time and non-billability, you have this task list both related to your personal work, your professional work, and the specific time that you put towards executing matters. And this is critical because you don't want to miss a court date, you don't want to miss a hearing, you don't want to miss a meeting with the client. So, of course, a proper calendaring system that combines the prioritization of your time between personal, professional, and running a legal business. So the 2 to 3 on a Friday afternoon, maybe it's meant for professional obligations, right? You're dealing with CPD hours today. Maybe on a Thursday, you're doing substantial. Rest of the time, you're working over your matters. Maybe on a Saturday, you're reviewing your pro bono hours, right? So having a task list or a to-do list across those 3 silos of how you manage business can help manage time better. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And last but not the least, interestingly enough, and even when we read this, this was kind of new and interesting to us as we put this presentation together, is the Law Society certainly wants to look after your mind space when it comes to being happy and content. And in many ways, they want you to be successful as a legal practitioner. There's, of course, the financial aspect to it. There's the aspect of posturing. They want to make sure that the Law Society is growing as an entity or a body. They want you to be successful. They want you set up for success. And the audits are, of course, a great way to catch any mistakes that you may be doing early on. One time is a mistake. The second time when the audit and that mistake happens, then maybe it's frowned upon. But the first one is always helping you set up for success. And there's a lot of importance given to, of course, trust-related financial transactions, misappropriations, right? That's where it gets really serious if you've done something wrong. But one silo aspect of audits and recommendations provided by the Law Society is around personal management. So having the ability to have a plan for success, whether that's financial, revenue, profitable success, whether it's success for you to have enough time to do what you do, love what you do, and then also have time for family, that work-life balance. And satisfaction with specific areas of practice maybe. So for you to review your own data so that when year 2 comes, you have a better appreciation for what's working and what's not. Because first year, when you're just getting started, you may not understand that. Second year, you have better data to support what's working for you and what's not. Maybe this whole idea of non-retainer-based work is just not working. So maybe year 2, it's all about the retainer. So the Law Society certainly talks about you having a plan to relax, enjoy life as, pretty much swimming in tsunami, as they say. a quick question around forms automation, so that we do have that in our upcoming series. You can check out, again, we had to make this change to accommodate some of our friends wanting CPD hours, but we're certainly going to bring in the forms soon, if not later. We'll definitely get back to you on the forms. Okay, it is the top of the hour. Again, reiterating that today's webinar for Everything Practice Management was accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. We're very close to the other 2 provinces to comply with this. This particular session is being recorded, will be available on our YouTube channel. You can use the title Everything Practice Management to gain your 1 hour of CPD credits as you log in into your Law Society portals. I'll pause at this stage, thank every one of you for joining us, and open the floor for any questions that you may have through the chat window. Thank you. Alrighty, if there aren't any more questions, thank you everyone for joining. We look forward to seeing you next Friday. Take care. Have a great weekend.